All right, great. So, hi, Kat. It's good to have you here. I know I was saying to you earlier, I was excited to record from home today so I could have my dog here with your dog. And before we get started, do you want to just introduce yourselves in your own words and talk about current projects?
Sure. My name is Cat Tyc, and I am a interdisciplinary writer. And basically that's just a way for me to kind of say that I write, but it kind of comes out however I want it to. Um, and Currently, my two main projects are one is called Significant Otherness, which is a art project that is centered around a fake podcast that I host with my chihuahua Agnes, Chihuahua Whippet, who is with me right now, and or with us right now in this interview. And I'm also working on an essay collection called Misses from the Ether.
Yeah, it was then I know we met through a funny encounter at a faculty party where you talked about your fake podcast. And I was like, oh, I have a real podcast where we talk with animals. So I feel like we were fated to meet. Especially
Right.
'cause it felt like neither of us often like brought that up at events and things. So it was like a special moment. So I'd love to hear a little bit about um this relationship you have with your dog and how that sort of became part of your artwork. Was that something you always felt like belonged as part of your writing, or was it a newer integration?
Um, I as someone who over the past few years has like kind of come to terms with the fact that I am indeed an essayist. After years of kind of like teetering that poetry and prose line. Um, I think everything in my life is material, and I think that's like kind of, Nora Ephron, obviously has like the most famous line about that, but so everything is kind of like for up for grabs. Agnes, she's my ride or die. She's my, with me all the time. I I had a chihuahua before her, which I will talk about as well. I'm a person that has a dog. Like it's funny. Like I just like kind of like that's what I'm known for, and in my life, like in my personal life, it's just, I don't think I'd go a day without someone asking me about Agnes if I don't have her with me. Um, so yeah, inevitably, I guess like she would come into my work. But how it came to be or how this project came to be, is that kind of what you're asking me?
Yeah, yeah. I because I know it is something newer and you're currently there doing your your exhibition.
Sure.
So I was just wondering, I don't know, because I think sometimes people, at least I guess I'm speaking personally, that it took a while for me to fully center animals in my creative work because there was this fear that they might not be seen as valuable as a subject as others. Yeah, so I was just wondering if that's an experience you had, or from the beginning you were always like, no, my dog belongs.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, no. I mean, I think that I I it's interesting in my work. Yeah, I mean, I've always felt animals are really important to me, and I talk about having a dog, or like it's just like kind of like the dailiness of having a dog. And then I mean, but and then it's interesting, in some ways this project was a way to kind of confront exactly what you're talking about, um that kind of feeling that it wasn't as relevant as, say, other kinds of relationships. But I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. So how this project came to be, started out in a conversation I was having with my friend Kayla. It was during the quarantine, and we were checking in, as friends were doing, just to kind of make sure that we were not going insane. And I was telling her about, so I live in Hudson, New York, and I live right in town, and my apartment overlooks this sweet little park in the middle of town where the majority of people bring their dogs to walk. And we were cooped up, and pretty much, you know, she had gotten into the habit of barking at the dogs all the time, because in some ways I think that Agnes sort of perceives this park as our yard, and that's her territory. And it was getting a little out of hand, mostly just because I also never left the house. So it was just like, and there was a dog coming all the time. So I had started working with a dog trainer on Zoom, and to kind of see if we could figure out how to curb this behavior. And I was telling Kayla about this, and I mean, and this is very, it's so quarantine now thinking about it. And I was really proud because the trainer like had um made a comment that she felt like we had really good communication, that we really understood each other, that she was like observing us, and I was like kind of like talking about my perceptions of her behavior and how she reacted to me, and and how for the most part like our dynamic was good, and like she wasn't, I could kind of manage her behaviors, but this one barking at the dogs in the park thing like kind of just felt gotten a little out of hand. Yeah, but she was just like, just seeing you two and seeing how she observes you, it just seems like you have a really good communication between the two of you, like strong relationship. And I was like, oh my God, as I'm telling my friend, she's just like, oh, it's so cute. You guys are like in couples therapy. And it was like this little like, her kind of humor. It was a little like, a little cynical, but like whatever. I was like, I don't care. And somehow that comment of in the conversation made me, I had this like this thought popped out of my head. It was like, yeah, I wish I could have like I could do a podcast with her. Also, I was listening to a like podcast obsessively. So it just kind of came out, and she's like, oh, that would be funny. Like that would be like a really funny show. Like I would love to hear that. And then so it just kind of stuck, and it was so weird and so dumb that like I kind of think that would be a great idea. Um and with the obvious caveat that we couldn't do that for real, but I like, that's kind of like where the concept was born.
Yeah. I,
Um
I love that it came out of this I don't know, this moment of humor in a sense, and then you're like, wait, but what would that be like? And so many people have conversations with their pets. I mean, that I think that's a similar phenomenon, right? Of like, I don't know, we're always interpreting their behavior, and sometimes I think we are interpreting at least close to maybe what they're trying to say. But I
sure.
really, yeah. So how are you approaching creating this exhibition and like demonstrating that like maybe impossibility, but like the desire for it at the same time?
Yeah, well then it yeah, then it was like, how are we gonna do this? So, and I have done like a smaller iteration. That was like the first show that I did up in Hudson was kind of was really like it, and it was an interesting process, because usually I kind of like plan things out way way thought out, and then kind of like produce, kind of think it out and then kind of work backwards. And this was a project that really has challenged me, because I realized that I, or maybe it was like kind of just based on the kind of just like the weirdness of the concept, and also just kind of like readily available resources. It had to be kind of like a project that I kind of had to just jump into and just like kind of start doing, to kind of figure out what it was going to be, and even like what it was going to be about, like it's like there's like kind of like one level of like, okay, like that's a cool weird project, but why? And kind of going back to your earlier point about is this even a valid thing to talk about? I think at the time, like I mean, I think at the time I was thinking about a lot of things. The Roe versus Wade news about the leak, about how that was kind of being discussed as being overturned, had just come out. And it was also just kind of like in my life, like a lot of questions about kind of motherhood, and I had a lot of pregnant friends around me, and who all have dogs, by the way, but um but it's different, especially kind of living upstate now, coming from the city, like kind of like the amount of friends I had that didn't have kids and were very career oriented. And then here, like I was just really aware of the fact that I was so surrounded by a lot of people that had children, because people move from the city, move upstate to have babies typically. That's kind of like, not to overly generalize, but that is kind of like the most popular narrative. And I was just like, I'm just like me living my life with my dog, and it's great. And but there was a little bit of a feeling of like one of us doesn't isn't like everybody else. And I was kind of interested in kind of like addressing that, and it felt like, and it's since that, like, whole, the whole question of like kind of like abortion and kind of women's right to kind of choose, like, has been brought back into the conversation nationally. It felt like kind of an interesting time to kind of think about how those two things intersect. So that was really pressing on my mind at the time. And and I wanted to do something kind of cute and weird about it. To also just like, also just like kind of confront how upsetting it all has been and is. So it was a little bit of both. And the first stage of the process was I decided to interview Agnes through an animal communicator to well, to be honest, because it felt like the only way I could truly collaborate with her. Like, and I just, and we'll talk more about this, but I just got home from a residency where I've been working on like the next iteration of this project, and I was talking about that choice with a curator, and they were like, oh, like, what, like, is it transcripts? Like, they're like, what is, communicator, that whole thing. And I'm happy to talk about that more as well. But for me, like, the choice was really like, I just wanted to actually make this a collaborative process, and that felt like the only possible way to do that. Um and also I wanted to kind of get her voice, like, as like from a writerly sense, like, I, at the time, this conversation I had last week with this guy, I was like, it's like, if I were a writer and I wanted to write about a town in India, like I might go to that town and live in it for a month to just like get the sense of the place. And it was literally the same kind of like logic as a writer, to kind of just see if I could kind of just figure out how to kind of interpret whatever came to me language wise in her responses, to kind of find some cadence of a voice that would kind of counter mine as the human. um so yeah.
Love to hear more about the animal communicator and what how you chose them, and how you went about approaching that as a material.
Sure. Okay. So, this is an animal communicator that I'd worked with before. Actually, she's relatively well known. Her name is Dawn Allen. Probably most known for being the animal communicator that Eileen Miles used in their book Afterglow, and talking to their dog Rosie. And I got connected to Dawn after my last Chihuahua, Thurston, passed away. And Dawn's information was passed along to me because I was pretty sad, devastated, and 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 I wanted to just check in. So that's kind of how I first worked with her, was just like actually just as someone who's grieving their dog and wanted to process the feelings and just like kind of see how he was doing spiritually. And then I talked to another dog I knew that was not like my full-time dog. I'd worked with her before. So it was like I already had like that kind of like experience in my back pocket of being like, oh, this is something that I believe in. That, I feel like I had confidence in kind of thinking like this was the collaborative strategy that would work. And and she had said like the last one, I kept talking to dogs that had passed away, and she was just like, oh, but you have a dog, like why don't I do like also talk to dogs that are with us, like I actually quite enjoy it. And so she had kind of like left that like and be like, oh, well, I feel like we're good, like, but then like this kind of came up and I was like, oh, Dawn had even said like I actually enjoy, like, it's different, talking to a dog that's with us, it's a different kind of um the emotional dynamic when for her when she's talking to a dog that's passed away or a dog that's lost. That's like that's like another thing that she does, is that, if someone's like missing a dog, they're trying to kind of find out like, oh, are you in a field or whatever, so, or in a car or whatever, so she's like that emotionally for her is a lot, it's a lot heavier, and she's just like, oh, I actually prefer that. So I kind of remembered that, and it was just like kind of that felt like worth an option, worth a thing to try. Um and yeah, so like I prepared questions, kind of like the basic stuff of like kind of like what was your life like before we met, and I asked her a lot of questions about like Brooklyn versus Hudson, and did she like our new place, like it was just like we like and like some questions about like our daily life, like did she like her food, which Dawn has said like this is usually what people want to know, weirdly enough. But yeah, so that's what it was, and we did it over Zoom so I could kind of keep the transcript, and so from those texts I started a script, and I did like a 10-minute pilot. um and I only did 2 interviews, basically because the second one, Agnes said, you already know enough. And it was interesting because we both had this feeling, and I was just like, Donna, do you think that she's like trying to like say, get that out of my head, lady? And she's like, yeah, I think she said, oh, I have to respect that. So then which was fine, like I would like kind of like, okay, like Agnes has like said like kind of like, this is as much as I want to talk to you, like whatever you're doing, whatever you're doing this for, I don't want to be involved anymore, which is fine. I was like, okay. um and yeah, that was that phase of the project, and then I just kind of like made a little script, and we did a show in Hudson.
I love that you went through that process of, and she was the one who set the boundary, because I was curious about that. Like, how do you know when that conversation's done, right? Because I feel like it could be endless, and maybe our expectation around conversation too is like it can be a daily thing. But it's interesting that there's like I don't know, a boundary around it, right? Like this was our moment of direct conversation. Do you
Yeah,
feel like in your daily life though that you are outside of the art project, right? Do you feel like you are in conversation with Agnes, like inside
do.
your home? Yeah, I would love to hear a little about that.
I do. Well, um I guess especially after kind of interviewing her, the two things, I mean, one of the big things that really stuck out to me was realizing how sound sensitive she is. And it was something that I had noticed for a while. Like I had this chihuahua before who I used to take with me everywhere. Like he was like I was like that lady with a dog in her bag all the time. And I lived in New York. I went to a ton of readings. I have a lot of friends that are musicians. I At that time in my life I was like out seeing music almost every night. And I always had my dog. And there were places I went to regularly, like that people just knew Thurston and they knew he was with me. And he would like stick his head out of the bag and just like his ears would twink, and he just loved it, you know. Um and when I first got Agnes, I thought, oh well, this will be a continuation of that. And she just she hates public events. She hates being in crowds. She doesn't like strange people looking at her. um she hates like when people like applaud at readings or at shows. She just like she starts going crazy and barking. She doesn't like it. And that became really clear really fast. And so it's just like, oh, like this dog I can't take out in the same way that I bopped around town with Thurston. So that was like kind of something, a big distinction that presented itself very early on. But it wasn't until years later when I interviewed her through Dawn that I realized, or she named, that she really hates noise, like a lot. Like there are these beagles that live next door to us, and she can, well, like if they're out, she will just straight up like wake up out of a nap to like bark at them from the window still. And she can, and they don't like her either. It's a whole like, definitely like they fight. They're both trying to run the block. And and so I asked her, like, why do you hate these dogs so much? Like, like, I mean, it's one thing when you're on the street, dogs on the street, like being territorial, like that's one thing. But like when we're like 3 floors up and like we're safe in the house, like what is the big deal? And she just like, their chains are so loud and annoying. And I was like, huh, okay, like that's, I mean, your hearing and I'm aware that your sense of hearing and smell are way stronger than mine. So, but I thought that was a really interesting note. Um, Another funny thing that she said, going on the sound thing, because that's like been the big thing, is like really realizing like, wow, this is like a really real like issue with her. And now I understand her reactions so much better. Like she really hates people who speak very loudly, and she'll like bark at them, but it's not because she doesn't like them. She's trying to tell them to like be quieter. And she told me that the thing that she likes about me the best is that I'm pretty quiet. Um, Trying to think of another funny thing that she said about, it's like, I mean, the sound thing, I mean, it really has like kind of like, it's something that like now I'm really aware is like it's her sensitivity, so I'm really mindful about it, and I understand why she reacts the way that she does. And so that's been like a really interesting thing with our dynamic. Oh, the other thing that she said, and it's ironic because it's about podcasts, and like I said, I was listening to a lot of podcasts at the time. And she's just like, she's like, you're very quiet. Like she's like, the thing I like about you is like you're very quiet, but I really hate all the voices.
Oh.
And I was just like, the voices. And then I was like, I think she's talking about all the podcasts I'm listening to all the time. And the next day, like the day after we did the interview, I'm like on the internet as you do. And I put on a podcast, and she gives me this look like, I thought we talked about this. I swear. And I'm like, this is like where I'm like kind of like, okay, like you can think I'm crazy and I don't care, But she gave me this look, and she gets up and goes to the other room, and she's like totally like, I thought we talked about this in therapy yesterday. Like, it just like the look that she gave me, and she was just like staring at me, and just left the room. And I was like, okay, I get it, I get it. And it's I actually listened to, I mean, it was a bit much at that time. Like, I don't listen to as many podcasts as I used to, but um I she hates it. She's just very noise sensitive, and she prefers quiet.
Yeah. Wait, that's amazing. I'm there with you. I feel like you might appreciate. I one time went to a medium to. I thought I was talking to my dad who passed away, which I was, but she was like, "There's this little dog who really wants to come through," and she described my dog, Ziggy, who you've seen. She's like this little brown dog, and so she's like, "Do you want?" I was like, "Yeah." I wasn't expecting that, and he had something about not as intense with the sound too, but I wonder if it's like the Chihuahua ears or something too. Like our downstairs neighbor have dogs, and he was more like he thinks they're rude. It's not necessarily maybe about the level. I just think they're a little rude, and he's like a little too proper for them, I guess. And yeah, but it was really interesting because I was like, oh, I could maybe try going to just a medium. So I'll maybe have to get Don's info from you because I would love to have
Happy.
your. It was more like he just wanted to come through and complain a little bit about, and he also
Sure.
thinks it's rude when I leave the house without him.
Yeah.
He's like, it's just like I don't know what to say to her about that, which I knew because so he gets upset. uh,
Yeah. 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 I had a friend actually that used the same medium to talk to her dog after working at home for a long time in quarantine, and then going back to work, and had to go back to the office, and her dog was having a very hard time with it. Um and she used this medium to um talk to him about, he was peeing, and like protest peeing, and so they had a very direct conversation about it, and he
wow.
stopped. Yeah. So it could be, you could speak to specific issues. Like, I feel like actually that's probably the most productive thing to do if you are doing that. Like,
Yeah.
um, but yeah,
Yeah. I would love if he could get along with like my friends' cats and things.
yeah, yeah.
That's because anyway, yeah, I want to ask you though before we go because I know we're coming up on time
Oh,
about
yeah.
I am because my little dog knows me. I really loved reading it, and I was um actually very drawn to like the parts about the crabs, which I wasn't expecting when I went into it, right? I was and I loved all this like sense of like otherness and touch and spirituality and how that kind of weaves throughout it. And I was actually thinking of like the final scene where you're with the science leader and he has you all touch the crabs with your fingers. And I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about that moment of that touch and like what it means to actually interact with creatures that seem other than us. Like why do that? Why not just eat the crabs and leave it at that?
Mm, um, I think, well, to give some context about the story, is so that is a true story, that happened. Me and a lot of people I knew, we had this woman we knew, like, she was interesting. Like, she was really, I knew her through kind of like the experimental music scene. We had a lot of common friends in that world. She also was this like environmental scientist, and also worked in sustainable fashion. She's just like one of those people that like, you're like, you're fascinating because like you have like 10 fingers in 12 different worlds. And she had invited me and a lot of people I knew from this like psychedelic weirdo jazz world to go out to this part of far out past the Rockaways called Plum Beach. I'd never been there before. I'm a native New Yorker. I'd never heard of this place. So that was already like an adventure into itself. And it was aligning with a full moon, and it was this kind of tradition that these scientists were, this is something that happened, that the horseshoe crabs come up to this part of the shore to mate, and it's part of, this study to kind of count how many crabs couple up, and population, environment, like, there's a lot of data being collected about that for a variety of reasons that, if I'm honest, I didn't fully understand. It wasn't really fully explained to us, but they needed help with counters, and she kind of made it seem like it'd be this cool psychedelic experience. So we're out there, and also, like, to make it the psychedelic part, she had kind of added this extra, you know, uh, dynamic of inviting the shaman to come. So we like meditated on the beach and did all this stuff. And um so it was just like a weird day. Like it um and it brought up a lot of stuff, because I like was like, as somebody that, like, like, if I'm going to meditate and you want me to visualize, like, I am going to commit to that. And also, like, I'm in a gathering with a lot of people, and I'm observing how everyone is taking in this experience, and we're, in this like beautiful environment, and we're doing this really weird thing. Everything about it was just so weird and othering, but also, like, I wasn't like, as we're always dealing with our stuff, and so it's like kind of like being in a really othering experience while you're working on whatever is currently making you feel like another. um it was all kind of jamming together for me, and but it was so beautiful too, like, and so, like, I think, what I remember coming home after that night, and I was like, I have to just like write everything down before I forget it. Like, it was like one of those rare times where like life gives you the material where you're like, I don't even have to make it up. Like, that's just a story. Like, that night was a story, and I'm going to process why it was meaningful later. Like, that will come, but like right now I have to like write down every detail, like all the weird like little conversational blips that like would get lost probably, like, if I returned to it 6 months later. So I just remember, like, and I was exhausted, like it started raining. I mean, it like the elements about it all just became very dramatic too, because, like, middle of August, heavy rain, I've been on the beach all day, I'm covered in sand. And before I took a shower and passed out, I just like remember like writing it all out. I'm not entirely answering your question, but like I feel like it all will land beginning back to that place. Um, why touching the crabs was so beautiful. I think it was just like kind of realizing, what I mean? I think that's, I mean, why I think I love writing about animals, and why, I think it's totally relevant, and probably the most important thing for me to think about creatively right now, is my relationship to animals and the animal I live with. And um because I think it's really important to like kind of be reminded as humans, like, that we're not the only beings, like, we're not that important, like, it was just like, and I think there was something about that night where it just became really clear that the banality of like where the cool place to hang out was in Brooklyn, like, just really was. I mean, it was already stupid to me, but then it was like it just felt more stupid because there was something so much more powerful and important happening around us. And um but also, like, uh, in some ways, like, the horseshoe crowds were basically just like picking each other up at a bar too. You know, like there was that parallel that like just kind of like struck me, and you know, but like it just like kind of like that, I don't know, I mean, for lack of a better word, like kind of the interdependence of existence, you know, and I'm really interested and fascinated by that. And I think it's worth kind of drawing attention to and shedding light on to kind of, you know, remind us to be, to kind of just keep things in perspective a bit.